Hi, my name is Chantel and I'm one of the co-founders of Locals Insight. Today, we are continuing our initiative of interviewing locals from around the world, and today we have Trisha from New Delhi.
नमस्ते, मेरा नाम त्रिशा है और मैं न्यू दिल्ली से हूँ.
So Trisha, tell me, how did you end up in New Delhi?
So I've lived in New Delhi for about 18 years, and my mom is from the US, dad's from India, and they ended up meeting in India and settling down in New Delhi. So it's me and my sister, and we lived in New Delhi for about 18 years until I came to the US for undergrad.
Dang, so 18 years. New Delhi's home.
Yes, yeah. So very, very local to New Delhi. It's what I grew up in. All my foundations, all my values date back to growing up in New Delhi until I came to the US for undergrad, and I really got to tap into my, half American side, and it was interesting to see how different of a culture I grew up in versus, living here in the US now.
Okay, so you're saying you're from New Delhi. Can you help me understand what's the difference between New Delhi and Old Delhi?
Yeah, absolutely. So Delhi is the Union Territory, and that is typically we use synonymously for calling it a state, and it is inclusive of Old Delhi and New Delhi. Old Delhi is more of a historic place. It kind of dates back to the Mughal era of India. So a lot of the architecture, a lot of monuments of Delhi are in Old Delhi. Mm-hmm. And then New Delhi is a more, up and coming urban neighborhoods city of Delhi. And it was very influenced by British Raj, like during the colonial era. So that I would say is the difference between Old Delhi and New Delhi. But New Delhi is technically the capital of India.
So a visitor coming to New Delhi, like what would you tell them they need to do in a weekend? Like what are some top things they should do or see or eat?
Well, in terms of seeing, I would say if you're coming to Delhi, this is going outside of Delhi to just, if you're coming to India for a weekend, right? And you want to walk away with like really impactful experiences and see Delhi in one weekend or India in one weekend, let's say. I usually recommend the triangle, the Golden Triangle, which is Delhi. And then we have Taj Mahal, one of the 7 wonders of the world, and Rajasthan, which is which is another state in India. And so if you were coming to visit, New Delhi, and only had 2 days, I would highly recommend doing this Golden Triangle. And the reason it's called a triangle is because they're all kind of equally distant from each other. And typically, foreigners that are coming and visiting will want to see, if I had to pick 3 things, I would say those 3 things.
So the Taj Mahal, one of the 7 wonders of the world, what are some do's and don'ts for tourists going there? What should you know? What should you be aware of?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I get that a lot from, guests that are visiting or friends. Something to definitely be watchful of is people taking advantage of you because they see that you're a foreigner, they see that you're new. An experience with when I took my friends to the Taj Mahal was you walk in and there's, people bombarding you from all different directions. It's super chaotic. You have tour guides, it's like you feel like in a way a celebrity because all of these people, want you to come and them be the tour guides for you, but you have to be watchful for some of them kind of ripping you off or taking advantage of you. And typically, as a local, you have to be smart about who you end up, going with in terms of a tour guide. But I typically, have to filter those out and just be careful about who you end up interacting with. So, but I would say another thing to be watchful of going to the Taj is the way dressing wise, just to be respectful of the culture. Showing skin too much is India is very much a progressive culture, but there's a lot about Indian culture that is more conservative, and especially when you're going out in local areas, you want to be careful and respectful of the way that you're dressing. So that would be another thing to kind of be watchful during the Taj Mahal. Another experience that I've had is the way that people view foreigners in India, and specifically the Taj Mahal. A couple years ago, I took my aunt and my one of my really good friends. Just imagine beautiful blonde, blue-eyed girl walking through Taj Mahal, and she had maybe 40 people come up to her and ask for pictures. So I would say that's also something to be prepared of, is like Indians are very fascinated by foreigners, fascinated by foreign culture. It kind of dates back to like British Raj influence and colonization, but they're just fascinated by like Western culture and the way that people look different, sound different, and all just Western culture in general.
So if someone's staring at you, you should take it as a compliment.
That's another thing I would say is very, very custom to India, is there's a lot of staring. And that's like, you just have to take it, you know, with a grain of salt. People are gonna stare, it's the culture, it's the way that it is. And a lot of it is because they're fascinated by the way that you look or the way that you are, because you're different, you know, as a foreigner. So
yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, so what is the nightlife there like? I imagine like very fancy clubs and this crazy experience, but like what has your experience been?
So the nightlife is very interesting. I would say when, you know, you go out, you can break your social life or nightlife into a couple different buckets. You know, we have one bucket, which is like, you can go to these bars, these clubs, free for entry for anyone. Like girls typically get in without having to pay like a cover. And those, I would say, popular places to go out like that, where it's like free for entry. You can walk in and find a place that's happening, or, you know, a place to party essentially, would be like Connaught Place. That's like a very popular like going out area in Delhi. And I've gone out there with my friends before, and it's, you know, it's a really good time. Then there's another bucket, which is more exclusive clubs, you can say. And the way that kind of Delhi works is that a lot of it is like, who do you know? What connections do you have? So there are a certain bucket of like nightlife places where you'll have to know someone to get your name on a list, or it's very exclusive. So there's a different discrepancy between like different classes, different people and all that, but if I were to describe the nightlife, it would be in these two buckets. Outside of that, though, I would say weddings are another form of like going out nightlife. It's very normal to be, you know, invited to a wedding of someone that you don't even know, because in India, like that's the culture. It's like when you have a wedding, you have to invite your clients, your exporters, your extended relatives, like anyone and everyone. It's custom, and it would be rude if you didn't. So there's been many a time where like me and my family, like we would go like on a Friday night or a Saturday night. That would be very typical to like go to a wedding. And also like wedding season's like a thing during more the auspicious periods of the year. You'll typically see a lot more weddings happening. And so that was something that was interesting to me when I came to the US, talking to people like, oh yeah, it was very normal for like us to go to a couple weddings like in the month of June, or like I've lost count of how many weddings I've been to, because it's just very normal in the culture to go out to weddings on a normal basis.
That was a social event. Common outing on a Friday night.
Yeah, I know, right?
Wow, that's so cool. Speaking of weddings, I've heard that the fashion is insane there, because obviously all the Indian wedding looks are the most colorful, vibrant. Like, can you tell us more about what that's like?
Yeah, for sure. So the clothing is very vibrant, as you said. Indian weddings are known for having, you know, very flashy sequins, like bright colors. And it's typical not to wear white at a wedding. I know that that's very like typical for Western culture. Bride wears white, but in Indian culture, white you typically wear when you're mourning the death of someone. You wear it like at a funeral, or typically more conservative families like widows will wear white. So white is typically like a color you don't see so much during like wedding season, because it's, you know, a joyous occasion. But I would say Indian clothing is very like Indian specific wedding clothing is very bright, flashy. There's a lot of really cool markets in New Delhi, one being Lajpat Nagar, which has a lot of different like mom and pop shop clothing stores. And it's really cool to find like a lot of different types of materials, styles. Things go in and out really fast. Like what's in today might not be in like a couple months from now. So I've noticed the styles have been changing a lot over the last couple of years, even more so than they were when I was growing up there. In terms of Western clothing, this is something that's interesting, that the culture is changing, and you'll find older women and like women our age wearing Western clothing more than Indian clothing now. And it's just like a cultural change that we're seeing, with maybe more Western influence, or just the world getting more like socially connected. But I would say dressing up is a huge part of the culture. That's something also I came here and I realized wasn't a big part, at least in California. Like athleisure is very, very like happening here, but like in Delhi, it's very much like you have to look great from like top down, the bags, the shoes, like everything. So people are very put together, I would say, like in terms of the way they dress up in Delhi. And like, this is very specific, but perfume culture, that's like a big thing there. And that's like my local experience, I guess I would say, is grew up wearing perfume. Like that's like very normal. Every girl will be wearing like perfume, or just, it's all part of the whole dressing up, put together look that I've noticed in just Delhi society.
Wow.
But yeah.
That's nice. I guess leaving the house, you can feel really great. Let's talk more about society. Like, what is that like? What has your experience been growing up there? Like, what are the people like?
Yeah, no. I would say the experience, definitely something like someone who was visiting should be, you know, mindful of, is that the population there's a huge discrepancy. India has, you know, not shying away from the fact that India is still a growing country. It's still developing, you know, and poverty is still something that's really big there. We just don't have necessarily always the infrastructure, the resources to help support the giant population that we have. And so it is something to be mindful of when coming. Like you will see all different types of life in front of you. I would say that's how I would describe Delhi, is like you see every type of person. It could be someone who's impoverished, right, to the upper class, to the middle class, to the average man, to, you know, just so many different types of people that you'll meet. And I would say like Delhi is described as chaotic. I would say if you focus on like the sound, you will always hear a horn.
Whoa.
Like someone because that's like, again, like it's super loud, it's super noisy. So I would say that's another thing, like that's I've grown up like interacting with. Is just blowing your horn is like very normal. Traffic is very normal. The way people drive, that's a whole other thing. Like the way people drive in Delhi, there's no rules. There are rules, but no one follows them. I think that's what it is. No one follows them. But this is also something I realized is Indians learn to be defensive drivers because no one's following the rules. You always have to be like
on guard.
Wow, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's something I brought with me here, is just super defensive, and like coming from a place that doesn't follow rules to a place that like really follows rules. It's been an interesting like transition. But in terms of society itself, like I said, you'll see all types of people, all types of life, and people are very welcoming and open, and stare a lot, but like very friendly. They mean well. And I also Indians are a very family oriented culture. Indian culture is very family oriented. It's similar to Mexican culture. Like I've had conversations with people before, but like family is integral, like very important to everyone. And whatever occasion they want to find to get together, families will do that. Which brings me to festivals. That's another thing. Like every festival is celebrated big, you know, across all families. Like growing up, I would get a holiday for every like small festival or small holiday that we had during the year. Like schools would be giving multiple days off the year for even the smallest holidays. But Indians want to find a way to like make a big deal of it. So
what are your favorite festivals?
My favorite, well, there's so many, but I will say Holi and Diwali are two of my most favorite festivals of India. Diwali is the biggest one, I would say, like even nationally, internationally known. It's the Festival of Lights, and it's the triumph of good over evil. And we have like diyas, which are kind of candles that are lit. That's very custom to like Diwali, and it's supposed to signify like warding off evil. Like all the bad spirits, all of that. And just having an occasion to like get together with the family. I would say Holi is my second most favorite festival of colors. And what you typically do is like a local, you will always find people like every people that don't even know each other interacting, because it's like this festival of like, we're all proud to be and patriotic to be Indian, so like you'll find a lot of like just random people interacting too, but you just put colors on each other. It's like powder color, and there's a very custom drink to Holi, which is called bhang, and it's weed. It's weed in a drink, but it is popular
throughout the day.
I mean, it's a choice. I mean, a lot of locals do that. That's very normal. But that's something that, you know, growing up was custom. No, I didn't do it, but like, but it's very custom to locals. And kulfi, that's like another. It's a Indian ice cream essentially. Something very custom to Holi as well, and just festivals in general and like weddings in general. But say Holi and Diwali are my favorites.
I feel like the only idea I have of Holi in India is from that movie, that Bollywood movie.
Ye Jawani Hai Diwani.
Yeah.
Yes.
What is your take on Bollywood movies? Like living in India, like I think, or living here, I think people watch Bollywood movies and think, oh, India is like this, but is it really like that?
Yeah, so that it's interesting you bring that up, because Bollywood has really changed over the last like 23 years, at least of me being alive, right? Like I've seen Bollywood change from like the movies that I would go as a child to like now what Bollywood's doing. I think a huge reason why Bollywood has so much like vibrancy and color and music, and like it's dramatic. Like a lot of the movies are dramatic, and it's interesting that I learned that when someone pointed it out to me, because that was what I was used to like growing up. Seeing like songs in a movie was like very normal for me, but like hearing people point that out just really made me think like it is different. It is very specific to Indian culture, and a reason for that is a lot of the population is, you know, lower class, like some in poverty, and people in the lower class, you know, who were struggling, had daily struggles, like trying to keep a home under their like a roof under their family, and just like struggled a lot in life, would want to go to the movies to escape that. They wanted to go and just escape the reality of like the struggles they were going through, and be able to fully just transport themselves in like a movie where like nothing's wrong, and like happily ever after, the girl ends up with the guy, there's music and song and dance. So that is a huge reason why Bollywood was typically like that, like in the earlier times. So that brings me to my point of nowadays Bollywood's producing a lot of movies that are like biographies, or like real, like true stories, where it's not always happily ever after, or it's more educational or more informative. So there's been an interesting transition, but Bollywood still does like the music and the dance, but that is to appeal to the lower classes who are like going to the movies to escape and not wanting to see like what they're going through. Like they don't want to see struggle on the screen. They want to see something that's like happy and makes them want to escape. So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that kind of explains why I don't like Bollywood movies. I find them really hard to watch.
Real to real life, but
Okay, back to being a tourist and visiting India, or specifically New Delhi. I don't know any Indian language. Would I be okay visiting on my own, or like what is the language? What languages are spoken there?
Well, India, very diverse country, right? Like I tell people that North India and South India could be like two different countries. Even within those like areas, there's so much variety between like food and language and like clothing and people. North India, South India, like very different. And so across the country, there's about 22 languages, but I would say, wow, a lot of people speak English, and English is actually one of the official languages of India. And it's something that unites the country, because as I said, North and South, very different. And they don't, there's one language that unites all, like the entire country, and that's English. I would say the second official language of India would be like Hindi, but Hindi is typically more spoken in the northern part of India. So English would be like the one that unites everyone together, and like foreigners coming like can get around. Of course, you'll meet locals that, you know, don't always speak English, or, you know, you have to kind of like, it's a game, you have to figure it out. But I would say it's not like a huge barrier to come to visiting India is if you don't speak the language, because English is very popularly spoken there, and people have that misconception that like English isn't like widely spoken in India when it's very spoken in India. So yeah.
Okay, good to know. I'll be okay. Can you possibly teach us some Hindi?
Yeah, for sure.
How would you say where's the bathroom?
So actually, bathroom, people don't usually typically use the word bathroom. It's toilet, and that's kind of rooting back to like, again, British Raj, like the Brits say toilet. So in Hindi, it would be toilet kahan hai?
Oh, okay. How would you say my name is Chantel?
Mera naam Chantel hai.
Mera naam Chantel hai. How would you say how would I get here?
मैं यहाँ कैसे पहुँच सकती हूँ?
Very beautiful language. Cool. Thank you for that little lesson. So when you were back home, like what was something fun you did with your friends? Like how did you guys entertain yourselves?
Yeah, so on the weekends, my friends and I would picnic a lot. And like I said, Delhi is very green. It's a very green city. There's a lot of parks around. So one in particular that's like famous is Lodi Park. And that is like, I would go with my friends on the weekends. We just lay out. It has some like historic kind of monuments, I guess. It's more smaller monuments, but it's still like historical architecture that dates back to the Mughal era. So that's another thing you'll see around Delhi a lot, like Mughal architecture, as well as a lot of the kind of British influence as well across, different buildings, historical sites. That was one. Another place that my friends and I would go to a lot is Khan Market. Very popular market. In fact, it used to be called the Foreigners Market. A lot of foreigners would go there, but that in the last like 10 years, ever since I went to school there, it's now become like one of the most like happening local spots. Ooh. Because there's a lot of like new restaurants there, stores, just things to do around there. It's a very popular spot for like locals to go nowadays. So I would go to Khan Market with my friends a lot to eat or even just like walk around stores.
So now when you go back home, what is one thing you have to do, see, eat, experience before you leave?
So I have my whole list of foods that I go through when I go home. Just different places, my favorite like joints that I have around like New Delhi. One of them being that rolls place that I mentioned like as well, Ali's, that's the name of it. It's my favorite roll place in like New Delhi. Outside of that though, home cooked Indian food is like the thing that hits the spot every time. And it's the one thing that I look forward to. Like I call my family like before I land in New Delhi, please have like this dish ready for me when I'm home, because I love like nothing beats like home cooked Indian food. And that's something I think every local or every person visiting should experience. Sometimes, it's out of your control. Maybe you don't know anyone that's there, but like there are different like excursions or like activities where you can get that experience of like local home cooked food. Actually had two of my friends visit and I took them as part of like an excursion that we did to a local's house where they made home cooked like Indian food, and so they got to experience that like outside of my home. But like there are different ways that you can do that even if you don't necessarily know someone local.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah, there's another difference between there's a big difference between restaurant food and like home cooked Indian food. As much as restaurant Indian food is great, it's a lot heavier, it's thicker, and home cooked food just hits different. It's lighter, and as I've said, like onions are very like staple in Indian culture. So like onions are always mixed in like all food, Indian food, as well as green chilies. That's another thing that like a lot of locals like to have, which I would say Indian food is spicy. Yeah. That was gonna be my next point.
Oh yeah, let's touch on the spice tolerance level. Like how does that like?
Oh, Indians love their spice. It's actually funny when you come across like an Indian who doesn't like spicy food, which I have some in my family that don't. It's very like that's very normal to find like Indians who love spice and carry that with them, even if living abroad and stuff like that. Still, that's a huge part of the culture, I would say, is like the spicy food.
New Delhi, what is religion like there? Like, is it a big aspect of the culture? Tell me more.
So religion is a really big part of India, like as a country. There's a lot of different types of religions, but I would say around 80% of the country is Hindu, and there's 20% that are, different religions. One of them being Sikhism, one of them being like Muslim. I actually identify as a Sikh. I'm go to a gurdwara. That's typically like our place of, worship, or our sacred place essentially. And I would, with any foreigners that come and visit, or friends or guests, like I think it's a must see to like go to a religious place of worship, whether that's a Hindu temple or like a Sikh gurdwara, or a mosque. But like gurdwara is like what I identify with, since that's my religion, and so I would say that's like definitely a must see thing for a foreigner. Sikhism within itself is a very open culture. We, invite people of all different races, all different types, like all around the world, to come, and there's no, restrictions of like you can't go in because of you're not identified as a Sikh. We also have something called langar, which is like every day for 3 meals a day, people who work at the gurdwara, essentially they cook food and they hand it out to anyone, and no one is ever turned down. It's like, wow, anyone can come and get like a free meal.
It's beautiful
during the day or the evening. So
I was gonna ask, I know you're saying everyone's welcome, but like I feel like someone that's not in the religion may feel like they're disrespecting the culture if they walk into the temple or the gurdwara. Like, do you think that tourists should feel like that, or you just walk in? Like, how do you just go?
No, I think definitely like researching, or like being, before you do visit like a place of worship, knowing like what the protocol is. Like, for example, for Sikh gurdwaras, you have to have your head covered, so like making sure you have a headscarf like covering your head, or just being respectful with your clothing, stuff like that. Like, there's no at least with like Sikh gurdwaras and like Sikhism, there's no restrictions with like who enters and who comes, and it's welcome to all. That's like something that's so beautiful about like the religion that I identified with, is that it's very inclusive to like everyone. I would just say like research and just be aware of the protocol, which is typically being covered and like head covered. So for Sikh gurdwaras, temples are similar as well. Hindu temples, you have to have your head covered. Same with the clothing, but I would highly recommend like anyone coming to visit India to go to one of those places of worship, because it gives you a snapshot into like the local experience. And a lot of people identify with religion. Like, India is a very religious like country. You find a lot of religious people, so that's a big part.
That's a huge aspect of the culture. Good to know. Thank you so much for sitting down with us today and sharing your culture, your country with us. I hope that people watching this are inspired to go visit, and just thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. And I would say to anyone that's coming to visit, like, definitely India is a very special place, and there's a lot to be mindful of, but there's so much culture and vibrancy there. So if you do plan on coming, do at least 1 week, if not more. It's just a lot to fit in, but highly recommend destination for anyone.